I will call the December 17th meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Thank you, everybody, for being here on a cold and actually not that cold, holiday-ish kind of a time. Thank you to Sabina, who brought us some very nice handmade, hand-baked mixed nuts, which you're welcome to help yourself do anytime. I'm going to just quickly go over the agenda for tonight. Our first order of business is to hold a public hearing on a proposed bylaw amendment to accommodate the construction of a new municipal garage. Then we will close the hearing and the Planning Commission will discuss the comments that we've heard and the material that we reviewed and determine if we are ready to forward the draft as a recommendation to the select board. And we'll move on to approve our minutes of November 19th. And the next topic will be to discuss our current regulations with regard to how the current regulations calculate residential density. Excuse me. We'll have a discussion about that. Then we will hear from Chris Brown about some of the work that the select board has been doing on the budget and in particular around the wastewater report, as that has been a topic of interest for the Planning Commission for the last year or so. And we'll hear some updates from any liaison work from Chris Sheen, our planner, and then wrap up the plan for the next two Planning Commission meetings. Does anyone need to make any changes or adjustments to the agenda? Does anyone need to make any changes or adjustments to the agenda? All right. So then the next thing is to, someone would make a motion to open the public hearing on a proposed drafted bylaw amendment regarding to Jericho, town of Jericho municipal garage.
I move to open the hearings.
Chris Brown, thank you. And a second? Second. Okay, so the hearing is open and the first items we'd like to share an overview of this bylaw draft and some of the background and how we got here as a precursor to then opening up for public comment.
If you want to go to the slide 3, we can kind of walk through that. Okay. Great. So just a refresher on where we've been. So we had our meeting here, the Planning Commission, where we discussed the proposed changes to zoning for the town garage. That was back in November. We had a warning for the hearing for this hearing in early March. So tonight you can see where we are on the timeline. We're having our first public hearing. If all continues to move forward, then the select board will have 2 hearings. They have one scheduled for January 2nd and on January 16th to consider the bylaw amendment to allow a town garage facility in an open space zone. All right. And then if you want to go to the next slide, slide 5, great. So just sort of a recap of why this change is needed. So there's been a discussion over the past couple of years about needing a new maintenance facility in town garage. There was a study that was completed, was approved by the select board. It included the location as replacing the town garage in its current facility. This is also consistent with guidance in the town plan, which talked about updating the town garage, also the highway garage. If you want to go to the next slide.
Sabina, are you trying to make the slide bigger? So I think if you go to slideshow up at the top of the menu right there, because right now you're in like edit mode rather than mode.
Or you can also hit where it says from current slide.
Yeah.
There we go. And then also just a reminder, so the study that had recommended that the town garage and maintenance facility go in the open space zone, but a municipal facility is not a current allowed use in an open space zone. So that is the whole purpose behind needing this amendment. When we looked at the options for trying to accommodate this, initially the thought was we would just make municipal facilities in general, something that would be allowed in the open space zone. We decided to narrow that and pull a town garage maintenance facility out of the general definition for a municipal facility so that it would be its own use. So it would be a narrower change to the zoning. So to do that, there were 4 places in the zoning that needed to be updated. So for general definitions, there needed to be a definition added. In the zoning use table, in the general development standards table, and then a reference in the character-based zone. So there are 4 proposed changes in zoning related to this one change. And you can see on the map where the open space zone is and where the facility is. So here, this is the same information that was presented at the November 19th meeting, where we are introducing a new definition of town garage and maintenance facility. Go to the next slide. So that was one of the 4 changes. These are the 3 other changes. So one is adding the municipal facility, town garage maintenance facility to the use table. You can see there are 2 districts where this would be allowed. One is in the open space zone. The other is in the commercial zone. Under 11 development standards, we've just added that all the uses are listed in the development standards list. So we've added the municipal facility, town garage maintenance facility under that table. We are keeping the same parking space requirements that exist for municipal facilities. And then the 4th change is a change to the Riverside character-based zoning district, again, where all uses are listed in the a table within that chapter, even if the use is not allowed. So you can see in this example, it's being added, but it's not being allowed in either of those zones. That's just consistent with all the other uses that are in that list that are also not allowed. We'll go to the next slide. Great. So those are all of the changes that are being proposed to support this addition of the town garage in the open space zone.
Okay, so since this is a public hearing, we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to hear any questions or comments from members of the public. And just so I know, is there anybody online?
Yes, we do have some non-PC.
Okay, so if you're on the Zoom, thank you very much for attending. It would be helpful if you could use the raise hand feature if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. I would like the comments very explicitly limited to the topic, which is the draft changes for bylaw amendment to accommodate a municipal garage in the open space district and in the commercial district. Does anybody want to ask a question or offer a comment? Okay, if you would state your name and come forward so we can hear you on the microphone. We are going to limit comments to 3 minutes.
My name is Jim Carroll. The conservation zone and the open space around the town property was not done casually. As you may or may not be aware, this was a unlined landfill placed where it never should have been, in a sand pit, which was common practice. Somebody else paid for the sand, you dig the hole out and you put it in there. So there is no potable water at town garage now. And it's a conservation district next to a capped landfill with a solar field on it. So it's possibly one of the worst places that you could ever choose to dig up and to put a commercial building. It doesn't have municipal water available to it. And there are other options. So if you want to have a facility, that's possibly, that doesn't count the contamination from the salt. So you've got all of the attributes that you would better off. And then you've got the residential zone and the mobs farm. So the fact that the land development regulations say you can't have it here, that's not a casual thing. It's not an error. It's something that was done deliberately, and there's good reason for it. To the best of my knowledge, there's been no geological, no water studies, nothing that I, as a private developer, would have to do before I could permit an industrial building that's going to have people in it that could be subject to all of the contaminations. The Army National Guard and anybody who wanted to, unrestrained, dumped stuff into that pit for decades. And it was covered over by sand. Sand is permeable. The water table's high. And so you could well be establishing something that you don't want to. There are better places to put the facility than putting it into the zone that it's in. I don't see that any process has been followed to consider whether in fact a building of this type should be there. And there are other better places more consistent with its use and allow the contamination that's there to remain there. And you can still put your salt and all the other stuff there, but to have a workspace, as a commercial person, we would never put a building there. It's not something we would take the risk with workman's comp and all of the other problems associated with contamination. And it's underground, invisible, and it has not been researched. So there's a reason why the land development regulation says you're not supposed to do it there.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Well, I might as well correct some misstatements.
Okay, just state your name.
My
Thank you
name's
very
Chris
much.
Flynn. I'm the zoning administrator for the town. This project will need to get a wastewater permit, so we'll have potable water. We're not excavating, it's slab on grade, so we're not digging down. Thirdly, we could actually build a facility without the zone change because it's a non-complying use, and there's provisions within the regulations that allow for non-compliant uses to be expanded and built. The reason we're not going that route is because it is a non-compliant use, and the job of zoning is to always be fluid, to be changing over time. And since this facility has been there for years, it makes sense to allow it to continue to be there, continue to operate, to continue to be able to be used properly. And the way to do that is to actually allow it to be a conditional use so it gets the necessary and proper review. Now, there's been no declaration that this is a contaminated site. Yes, it's an old landfill. But I'm sure that basically when the solar farm went on that area, they did all the proper vetting. Again, we're not digging down, we're not excavating, we're not doing the things that have been held out. And it will have potable water because it needs to have potable water. The garage presently now has potable water. So I guess if you have any other questions, otherwise, those are my statements. It is good planning. It's the right planning. It's the right change for an existing use to allow it to continue to occupy and operate there.
So the current water is on site is from a well.
Yes.
How often is it tested?
I have no idea. I mean, how often is your well tested?
Years every couple of years.
Really? Okay, yeah, so I'm not aware of that requirement.
Thank you.
I'll also add the conservation easement on Knobs Farm specifically did not include the town garage as part of that easement, which tells me that it was intended to be a use that would continue to operate in that location.
I'll be over here with this.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other comments from the public?
No hands.
No hands online. Okay, so, I have a motion to close the public hearing. Eric, thank you. And a second to close the public hearing.
Second.
Chris, thank you. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
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 Okay, so now the planning commission, does anybody have any comments or questions about the material that Chris presented or what we've heard from the comments in the hearing? As a
Given that
way of preparing ourselves to eventually, hopefully soon, vote on whether or not we want to move this forward. Go ahead, Eric.
Given that we're talking about the specifics of the amendment, I don't have much to say on that, because I think it's clear what it should be. I think that we do have, there's an indication that we might want to somewhere include in, not part of the regulation, but something that suggests that the town do a comparison or a deep investigation into the status of the water, the leachate, and any air emissions that are coming out of the old dump as part of it. Not so much for zoning, I get it, it's not zoning, but just for a liability issue, let's make sure there's not some nasties emitting from that old dump that we don't know about. But that's not the amendment.
How about Sarah, Jane, or Wendy? I want to make sure I give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions or make any comments.
Thank you. No, I'm good.
Yeah,
You're good.
I'm also good. I do hear what Eric is saying. I understand that that's not the purview of the planning commission or this amendment, and I do think it's important. I'm assuming that that is something that is regulated by OSHA and that there is a protocol for that, for making sure that it is a safe environment. And that's how we ended up with knowing that we needed a new garage, because that old space failed all those tests.
I also think that the report did the town hired a consultant and they evaluated, I don't know if this group remembers that we actually raised the question about whether or not the current location was the best location, if you were going to choose a new location. And did raise that as a question to the select board, some form. And the consultant's report does, I think, very minimally address whether or not there were other locations that would be better, and came to the conclusion that this was in fact the best location for a variety of reasons. That was pretty objective reasons. And that is the recommendation that was selected by the select board, hence the name. And it was the select board that initiated this request to the planning commission to do the work and do the due diligence to update the zoning. Okay, so procedurally, Chris, I'm just verifying for you exactly what our motion needs to say is that we want to take the draft that you just presented and forward it as a recommendation to the select board, and also the report, or the report to be prepared.
Correct. So, yes, to the first part, we have the draft text presented here that would be what would be forwarded on to the select board for them to approve, to formally approve the change. A report was sent out to the planning commission on this. It's posted on the town's website. It is what is. The planning commission is required to submit a report to the select board along with the change. So it would, tonight, the planning commission would need to vote approve the text to be changed, as well as approve the report to forward that on to the select board.
Okay. So are we ready? Do we have any other questions? Okay, and can we do that as one motion? The report and no change,
They
yep,
can all be one motion.
okay. So, we want to take a motion. Oh, well, everybody's listening.
I'll move that we forward the report and the recommendation to the select board and recommend that the select board approve both of them. How about that? 2 approvals.
Okay, adopt
Adopt. Even
an
better.
amendment to the land use and development regulations to accommodate the municipal garage.
Could have made it yourself then.
Right, okay. So Eric, and then who seconds it?
Second.
Chris, wow, you're so busy tonight. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Okay.
Aye.
I,
Aye.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for being here. Thank you very much. Okay, so our next topic is to approve the minutes of November 19th. Do I hear a motion? Heidi, thank you. And a second. Sabrina. Okay, Sabrina, second, approving the minutes. Any corrections or comments on the minutes, November 19th? Okay, vote to approve the minutes. All those in favor of approving the minutes, November 19th meeting, say aye.
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 I,
You're saying November 9th,
I,
Isn't that what it was?
not
No.
Oh,
December 3rd?
oh, December 3rd. Yes,
Any motion?
yes, all right, we need to.
I
motioned for the 17th, sorry.
Yeah. And I wasn't here for the 3rd, so I can't motion for that anyway.
Okay,
I'll motion for the 3rd.
okay, thanks
have-
Heidi. Thank you, Sabina, for catching that. So Heidi made the motion, so we were track the other motion, Nancy. Okay, we'll delete that out. So Heidi made a motion to accept the minutes of December 3rd. Sorry, that it was different. A second. Chris Brown. And all those in favor, oh, any questions or edits to the minutes? Okay, all those in favor of accepting the minutes for December 3rd, say aye. Aye.
I,
Aye.
Eric, you're abstaining?
I will understand.
Okay. All right. The next topic is residential density.
Great, so I'm gonna kick this off, but then I'm gonna hand it off. So this is a continuation of a discussion which we started the last meeting, which was looking at how residential density is calculated in some of our zoning districts. This whole look at the regulations is to support new housing, more housing in Jericho is consistent with recommendations in the town plan. It's consistent with the housing resolution that was adopted by the select board. Up on the screen right now is the project timeline. It has shifted a little bit from what we saw at the last meeting. We added additional time to share some analysis that the project team has pulled together to share that with the planning commission and give you some ideas about where we're going. So we can talk about that a little more tonight before we come back with some more specific changes to the regulations, which we're hoping will be coming back at the January 7th planning commission meeting. So we'll be kicking off the new year with some good stuff. And then just a reminder for the project team, it's myself, Sarah Jane, and Susan. Sarah Jane and Susan are doing a lot of the research into this, and I'm just kind of helping in an advisory capacity. And they've been doing some awesome work, which you'll see some of that tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Susan or SJ. I think SJ is going to go walk through some of the information that we'll put together.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm so sorry I can't be there. Kids are petri dishes. So for tonight, this is kind of a status report of where we're at. And with information that we shared tonight, want to have an opportunity to invite you to continue the discussion and consideration of options with us. Next slide, please. And before we get started, actually, I think Heidi, I think you called this out at our last meeting, and it's important to just ground ourselves in terminology. When we talk about dwelling type, that's the structure that we're talking about. So that might be a fourplex or a duplex or a single household. When we talk about dwelling unit, that's like the residence within the structure. And so there might be a structure like a duplex that has 2 dwelling units in it, if that makes sense. So just so that we're all on the same page there. This slide is the same slide that you saw 2 weeks ago. Again, a reminder that the goal is to calculate residential densities in a way that supports Jericho's housing goals, which are, briefly for more types of housing, more housing that's affordable to low and middle class households, more opportunities for infill, and just more density in our designated areas for compact growth. We'll talk about the current density calculation in just a moment. Actually, let's just do that now because we've all seen this slide a bunch already. Next slide. So Jericho density there's a few things that we need to kind of ground ourselves in when we're talking about density. The first is Jericho density is defined by minimum lot size. And that minimum lot size varies depending on what zone you're in. So on the left-hand column are the zones, and then that first column there is minimum lot size. So in the village center, it's 1/4 of an acre. Commercial and village districts are 1 acre. Low density residential is 3 acres. And then our rural ag and forestry districts are 10 acres. That's the minimum lot size. Our zoning also defines the dwelling types that are allowed as permitted or conditional uses. And these are dwelling types. So these are structures. And you'll see that the types kind of going across the table there. So triplexes and fourplexes are currently a permitted use in our village center, our commercial district, and our village district, and our conditional uses in our low density residential. 5+ units or 5+ dwelling structures, so those that have more than 5 units in it, 5 units or more, are currently permitted in our village center and in our commercial district and are conditional in our village. And so the project that we're looking at is really to look at our current zoning and acknowledge some zones that allow uses like triplexes and fourplexes aren't allowed. Those uses aren't allowed on the minimum lot size. So let's go to the next slide. And again, we'll take the village district as an example. Village district is a nice example because the minimum lot size is 1 acre. And so the math is kind of easy to do. So again, village, you've got a 1 acre minimum lot. You're allowed to have up to a fourplex in the village district. However, our current density limits you to either 1 single family or 1 duplex on a 1 acre lot. So you can build your single family, you can build your duplex, and even though triplex and fourplex are permitted uses, you can't build them on the minimum lot size. Next slide. So this is a summary of just some of the analyses that we've done so far. This is kind of high level. The relevant details will be compiled into a report and will be used to kind of explain later how we arrived at a red line that we'll hopefully present to you at the next meeting. But I just want to let you know kind of what we've done, what we've looked into after taking your comments from 2 weeks ago into consideration, and also to just see if there's anything that we haven't thought of to look at that you're curious about. So first, we kind of looked at how other folks do density. Susan did a crazy night of looking at how density is calculated in other towns across the country. I spent some time looking at 3 towns. I looked at Huntington, Heinsberg, and Richmond to see how they calculate density, both in their village centers and their areas designated for growth, and then in their more rural areas. Susan also did some work on looking at Act 250 thresholds and how that may or may not play a part in how we think about this big picture. We met with our zoning administrator, Chris Flynn, a couple of times to make sure that we had a good understanding of how the current regulations work and how any changes that we might want to make to those regulations would work within the surrounding regulations, so the existing text outside of the density. And then we went through and tested some hypothetical examples using rules both for conventional subdivision, which is pretty straightforward, but then also testing some of the changes using PUDs and looking at the density calculations with PUDs, and then also taking into account density bonuses and how increasing the density in some of these areas might be impacted by things like density bonuses, to make sure we understand the scale and the scope of what we're talking about. And then lastly, I looked at a couple of sample neighborhoods that have come up in conversation relevant to this topic. I looked at 3 different neighborhoods. I looked at Sunnyview and Lafayette. Both are in our village center. Let's say Sunnyview is about 52 acres with 66 units on it. Most of the lots are about a ½ acre. And they're all single family with the exception of 1 or 2 duplexes in that neighborhood. Lafayette is about 11 acres with 26 units on it. There are 2 parcels that are about 1 acre, but overall most are about ½ acre lots. And then I also looked at Starboard, and Starboard, this table oversimplifies Starboard and really doesn't do it justice. It's an interesting one to look at because it's 37.5, a little bit more than that, acres with 67 units, but there's common land, there's a lot of single household dwellings, but then there are also these 7 and 8 kind of condo buildings that are connected. They share walls or they share garages. And so you'll have kind of 8 units on one lot, or in one case, 15 units on one lot. And you still got wooded land around it. Anyway, all of that is to say, it was another example that I think is a good one when we're thinking about looking at multi-household dwellings, and that kind of boiling it down to just these couple of data points doesn't really give the nuance to it that it deserves. So our current slide. So what we heard from our last discussion and from kind of doing all that research that I just outlined, was that we wanted to focus the scope to really focus on districts that are slated for denser growth, which means essentially not rural ag and forestry. We do want to increase the number of units per lot in growth districts. And we also, the text here is on this slide, and you can see that it's not totally clear, which I think is one of the big reasons why we're all having this conversation. So another goal for the project was to make sure that any change that we made was clear and consistent. And one of the ways that we thought to be clear was to include a table that would very clearly state the density by zone, in the same way that we have a table that states our uses per zone, and we have a table that states our dimensional standards by zone. So it's consistent with the other ways that the regulations lay out, are formatted and organized, and will also be clear. And then additionally to support that, to make sure that we have text that is, we want to make minimal changes, but make sure that, again, those changes support clarity and consistency. And what we have here just highlighted is the text that really narrows down the density to being either a single household dwelling or one duplex per minimum lot area. So that's the part that we want to look to amend. And what we're considering is amending that to 4 dwelling units per minimum lot area. Next. And if we were to do that, we then again go back to our friendly village lot, which is a 1 acre minimum lot. Single up to 4plex are allowed. If we increase the density to 4 units per minimum lot, now we can get all 4 types of dwelling structures on a single minimum lot. Next. Susan, I'll let you take over from here. And if I missed anything, please fill in for me.
I'd say, Sabina, can you go back to the slide that has the yellow highlight? I do want to publicly acknowledge Chris Flynn, who was very patient and got like 18 emails. And actually, I think it was more than a couple of meetings. I think we actually met with him 4 times. And at least 2 of them was more than 2 hours. Because this yellow text seems clear, seems not that complicated, but it's actually, if you think about numerators and denominators, and the previous slide, we talked about the concept of density was framed in terms of units per acre. And the Jericho regulations imply units per acre, but don't actually work based on units per acre. It works based on per minimum lot area, but the lot area is different in every district. And it's also not explicit about what happens when the lot's bigger than that. What happens when you have a structure that's not a duplex and not a single family? That 3rd unit, that 4th unit, that 5th unit, they don't all divide by 2 very equally. And so we would walk away from a meeting with Chris and he would explain it to us. This is how the regulations, this is the instruction that the regulation provides. Therefore, this is how I administer that. And FJ and I would go work on it, and then we'd say, oh, well, then that would mean this and that would mean that. And then we would go back to Chris, and because his understanding of the regulations is vast, and you don't appreciate from this one sentence all the different components of the PUD has open space lots. How does that relate to density? And PUDs require reduction in acreage, and some of the language talks about units, and some of the language talks about acres, and some of the language talks about lots. So you can drive yourself crazy, and take it from me, it happened. So that I think I'm humbled by the exercise, because I think a month ago I was like, let's just do this. Why is this should be quicker. This should be easy. It's a couple of sentences. We just have to change these few words. And the end result might be not a lot of changes. It might be just a few words, but the ramifications of that, we scrutinized that, and we got really very far on the density part, and we are still working through some of the PUD parts. So just, I think we should appreciate Chris Flynn's patience, and Chris Shaheen also really agonized over it with us. And it's great that SJ has recently come on to the planning commission. So I guess.
Well, and I will echo that though, because I wanna say that, we were going through a bunch of examples because we were trying to blow holes in what we were doing. Or we were trying to find unintended consequences or places where all of a sudden a number might snowball. And we want to make sure that we're very clear about the impact that these changes will have. And so that meant that every time we thought we came up with an example that maybe challenged what we had written, it meant we had to go to Chris and be like, okay, did we get this right? Did we interpret this right? Or can it be interpreted in a different way? And so it really, I just want to echo everything that you just said, Susan.
Right. We also had, so the state also passed 2 bills in the last 2 years that affect how municipalities administer density. So we actually still have a step of making sure that we're consistent. And then one of that is in preparation for water and wastewater, where the Act 250 exemptions would matter, where they don't currently potentially apply to us. We also wanted to be in a position where we should be consistent as assuming as if these areas were capable and planned for denser growth and not have the regulations stand in the way, that it was more based on what the resources were available. So I guess that's a little bit of a try to get your thoughts going about questions and things that you might have for us. So I think what I'd like to do maybe is give the planning commission time to have some comments about it. Then we'll hear some public comment and then we'll go back. We're not making any final decisions tonight. So there's also time to communicate with Chris after the fact. Chris, you look like you want to.
So, yeah, so I was thinking there would be a slide with the proposed new yellow text, but you're basically saying you're not ready for that yet. You also alluded to sort of sweeping inconsistencies in the zoning between lots, units, and are you suggesting that we would address all of those inconsistencies? Or do you think we don't?
They're not really sweeping, they're like micro, which is kind of the problem.
But, well,
So,
I guess what I took from what you said, maybe sweeping isn't the right word, but
Pervasive, maybe?
pervasive. There's a bunch of them.
they're right in this 5-6, that yellow statement that you said, and then in the PUD has a section on density. It's just those 2 sections.
So maybe I misheard what you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's that within like literally 3 paragraphs, the grammar, not even grammar, the variables, the numerators and the denominators, if you try to, like Chris Shaheen was like, why can't we just have a mathematical equation? Because the variables keep changing depending, and you have to have, master's degree level Chris Flynn zoning administrator knowledge to be able to interpret the different nuances that come across your desk.
So I would say this is where it got complicated. So if you look at the simple question of trying to trying to make it easier to do the type of housing that's allowed in each zone on each lot, that is the narrow change that is being proposed. And if you can pull the slide up that shows the yellow and the table. The reason why we don't have a red line to share right now is because we don't want to keep this narrow so that we can move this along more quickly. We don't want to get distracted by all this other stuff that is just going to continue to work the way it's working. We only want to look specifically at this density calculation. So I think this is understood, but I just want to make sure it's understood. Residential density throughout Jericho starts with 2 units per minimum lot size. That's throughout the whole town. So if you see like on the table where it's like density consider, if this was reflecting the existing scenario, it would just say maximum number of units 2, 2, 2, 2. So we're taking out that, we know we want to at least take out what's highlighted in yellow and replace it with a table that is more reflect, which shows what's here. So I think that helps narrow what we're looking at. And all of these other things that still need to be addressed at some time is more complicated, and we're trying to keep it focused.
So at the end of your work, you will be confident to say that making this change, we don't have a sort of snowball effect that we can't anticipate.
I mean, I
That's
think,
the
we'll-
idea.
yeah, I think we'll be a lot more confident than we were 10 days ago.
Right.
Where-
Very good.
But not that the change is necessarily any different, it's just that we understand it a lot better.
Yeah. And can you remind me why we're focusing on those 4 districts and not others?
These are the districts that allow triplexes and fourplexes in the use table.
For now,
Yes, currently.
we will come back to that at some point. Okay.
So I mean, if I, just for comment base. When you touch this, you touch the whole document, not just one section. So you really got to look at all the different components. And even though it seems like a simple, I'm going to change it from number 2 to number 4, and they allowed use, there's other things that are to be considered. What's being proposed, I support. It needs a little bit more definition so it functions in a way that's pretty simple. So if somebody new is in this position, which there will be somebody new, it doesn't give them discretion, or it doesn't ask them, what does this mean? You don't want that to happen. And so if you do have some inconsistencies, whether it's unit or lot or whatever it may be, you create a definition that describes what that is. So it tells you what it is. So there's a lot of different checks and balances you can do. They're very close. I mean, and the changes that want to happen are supported. But taking a little time to get it right just makes a lot of sense. And if the planning commission had something proposed, I'm pretty sure I'll probably look at it. And if I don't support it, I'll probably be sitting here telling you, don't do it. So, I don't envision that happening because we all want the same goal. But again, you touch one part, you touch it all.
Right, because if you think about the map, so the village center zoning district has 1/4 acre lot size now. So when you look at it units per acre, and it's allowing a duplex or a single family, is a duplex the same as is 2 duplexes the same as 1 4-unit building, whatever. So the village center zoning on a per acre basis is already currently 8 per acre. So we were also looking at, even though Jericho doesn't currently operate on a units per acre basis, we still were backing it into, it's like, if we were, since most of the world operates that way, how would that look and what would these changes be? And we have a good way of explaining that I think we would include the next time when we know exactly how it's going to pan out.
What's the significance of using the per acre calculation? Why does that matter?
It's kind of, well, it is the way most people do it, most
But if it's
towns and cities,
but
but
it's 1/4 acre zoning, is it a useful exercise to extrapolate that up to an acre? I don't understand.
no, we wouldn't in the zoning. I was just thinking more of to like explain like the impact of a change or to compare one district to another. If you just look at that chart, it sort of makes the districts look like they would all have the same density, but in fact they won't, because the low density residential district is based on a 3 acre lot size. So it's just a way of equalizing it or comparing them, I guess.
Keeping it simple works.
And
I
does
think-
I think it's a
Guys.
matter where you look to see what the impact of the density is, because if you look at a minimum lot table, and you can see that the minimum lots in each zone keep getting bigger, that's how you know that you have less density, because we get bigger, right? And other zoning regulations, that is more obvious in a table like this that lets you know the density. So you have a higher density, and then you take whatever that number is and you multiply it by square foot or acreage. But that's just not how Jericho zoning is set up. It's set up based on units per minimum lot size. So that's why when you look at this, it looks 4,444. That doesn't really tell you what the density is. You have to look at the lot sizes to figure that out, which is fine. And it's actually would be easier because now, as part of what we're looking at, we're proposing setting up the density table. It's consistent with the way the rest of the zone is set up. It would probably be better to understand this more conceptually if we had put all of the zones up here, including the ones we weren't considering changing. Because then you would see, like in the open space zone, it would have a 0, in the forestry zone and the rural agricultural residential, those would both have 2s, and then these would have 4. That's what would ultimately come in a red line. You would see that.
we also want to give more flexibility so that if you have 8 acres and you want to do all duplexes, fine. If you wanted to do quads, fine. Like the regulations shouldn't be limiting what the options are and how you divide it all up, as long as you meet the lot size, as long as you meet the use table, as long as you meet the density limit, then you should have the flexibility to make it work the way that it works best on your particular site and how you want ownership to go. And if you really want to subdivide everything, or if you want to keep ownership of the land differently from the ownership of the home.
So I'm noticing we don't have anything about lot coverage. What percent of the lot can be covered at a maximum? So in theoretically in a village center, can you go to 100% coverage? Or do our setbacks mean that that's not possible? And how does that affect the ability to put a quad on a quarter-acre lot?
Right, so there is a table of lot coverage. I don't remember off the top of my head. Actually, you would probably know what the lot coverage.
7.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, different lot coverage, each zone district has different variants
Yep.
of lot coverage. But when you get into sort of the development end of things, lot coverage isn't going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back on a development. Basically, when you allow the density to increase, you're not going to get stopped by the lot coverage. There's also basically the ability within the review to ask the JRB to waive certain criteria, and density is one of them. Where they could increase that density. Again, that's sort of like my statement. When you touch one thing, you touch a lot of things, and so.
right, and the current regulations also for village center have no density limits for senior housing or affordable housing in the village center, and that's the way it already works now. So whatever you could fit, whatever you could support from a water wastewater point of view is what you can build, and the definition for those things doesn't require that it's 100% of the development. It just requires a certain percent of the development. So that's another kind of factor that we considered also.
And Eric, I want to answer I want to respond to your comment. As we were thinking through this, we thought about that. We thought specifically about lot coverage and how that might need to change. But in having that discussion with Chris Flynn, he basically said, you don't have to worry about that. The existing lot coverages, allowances are enough to allow this change of density, that they do not need to change in response to this.
Flip that around, and if we want to encourage something that looks more like, say, downtown Richmond, where buildings abut each other and have multiple uses in them, are the lot coverage ratios going to prevent that from happening? Which is something we'd like to have happen.
Yes, so I think that is what we are looking at as part of the BMG grant. Because that is looking specifically at the village centers, right? Yeah. There were some things that we talked about as a group about possibly changing for the village center that we did not want to, we wanted to keep this sort of clean and consistent. And there are other things that we are going to be talking about as part of the BMG that are going to touch on this too, but we're compartmentalizing that.
And I'm happy with it.
Right, so we're also, yeah, because we don't want to have to necessarily undo this
Mhm.
once we're finished our work with David, but David's work might in fact change some of this. We don't know down the road, but we don't think so. Because we looked at what his red line said and tried to kind of compare it to what we had learned.
My basic point is, if our goal is increased density per lot unit, there are certain places where the lot size butts up against setbacks, which would not allow us to achieve that goal. And in those cases, it makes sense to me that we should say you could go up to 100% lot coverage, provided you have parking underground or something like that. But, you know, that's not part of this particular step, it's part of the BMC, and that's what we should try to do.
And when you're getting up to the village and the LDR, you're talking about 1 acre lot and 3 acre lots.
Yeah.
So you just have,
Plenty of space.
you have a lot more percentages to.
And in those spaces, we really don't want to have 100% coverage, or even 80% coverage. Be a rather large building.
I think part of that is there's a couple of good points in that, which are, you know, one, there are other things that constrain development that we either want to intentionally keep or want to look at, but that do help to constrain the impacts of these changes that are outside of a density calculation, and they're all the things that you're touching on. And then the same point, but slightly different, is that this isn't the fix. This isn't the response to the housing resolution, right? This is one fix that seemed narrow enough yet impactful enough to kind of fast track, but knowing that it's happening kind of on a sped up timeline ahead of hopefully some much more inclusive, broad changes that address this topic too. And one of the great exercises, or one of the great things that came out of this exercise, was I've got so many ideas now for how other towns kind of how our neighbors deal with these questions when we're ready to move on to that bigger package. And also obviously applies to Village Center too, but it is a tug of war between really wanting to keep this narrow and then all of the like, oh, but that I'm constantly coming up against. And then the other thing, Chris, I do want to acknowledge Chris Brown. I do want to acknowledge like acres versus minimum lot, and like, why does it even matter? And this is a little bit in the weeds, but because of the order in which you do the calculations to determine your maximum potential number of units, it starts with your maximum potential number of lots and then goes from there. And so the math is slightly different if you're using minimum lot versus acres to determine how many units you can have. And so since everything is built around minimum lot area and how many lots you can potentially have, and everything builds from that, it makes sense to stay with that and not switch to just acres.
Okay, any more PC comments, questions?
One last question. Is there a way in which it would impact any of this thinking if we were at some point in the future to propose changing minimum lot sizes in different districts?
Yes. That would multiply the benefits even more, I would say.
If they were to go down.
Correct, that's.
Right.
Yeah, which is what I was thinking. But
Right.
yes.
But that's a good point. Whereas if we were to do it by acre, it wouldn't matter how you changed the minimum lot size. It wouldn't have as much of an influence on density. But if you're tying it to minimum lot size, then any change that we make in the future to minimum lot size will have an impact on density in a more direct way.
The idea of minimum lot size has some negative consequences. Because that's what sort of, in a good way and in a bad way, sets the pattern. But because PUD is pretty powerful, and we also, Chris had CCRPC, we didn't even include this in our research list, had CCRPC produce a map of Jericho that showed the sizes of parcels and where we have the most dense development and where we have the least dense development, and it kind of maps the zoning districts. It's helpful because it's consistent, but you can see how with, most of our parcels are larger, quite a bit larger than the minimum lot size, and we even found some very large parcels that are still relatively undeveloped in a lot of these areas. Sure, they have constraints, sure who knows what the people want to do with them. We're not saying that, but just sort of theoretically. And PUD gives you a lot of flexibility, but in a way that this would, I think, make PUD also more flexible, more usable when we get the PUD part right. So. Okay, I think we should hear any public comments or questions that we have. Again, we're not making any decisions tonight. This is just a discussion. For Shaheen, welcomes discussions anytime during office hours as well.
Email me ahead of time.
Yeah. Okay, Chuck, I'm gonna ask you to stick to 3 minutes. If you can, please.
You were talking, the densest housing in Jericho is not in the village centers, and in my view, never will be. Certainly not in our lifetimes. I mean, if you look at the chart there, that SJ showed, there's more housing on Starbird than Jericho Center on 1/3 of the land. And when we're thinking about density, I feel like we really need to be looking at the village area. And that the minimum lot size there needs to drop dramatically. So as you're thinking about this, anticipate that also the village area needs to expand dramatically. I mean, one of the big potential areas for housing for us is around Mount Mansfield, where now that land is being gobbled up by $300,000, $900,000 houses on large lots. So if you make that change before all that land is gone into a small village zone, there is that opportunity. I've heard you talk. A couple of people have said that triplexes and fourplexes are permitted in the 3-acre zone. They're not. It's by conditional use, which is a big difference between that and a permit. And I encourage you to envision that they don't require conditional use as you're, as you're looking at these, this work. You want to make sure that they are not allowed. And to be looking at this from a builder's point of view, right now, in the 3-acre zone, if you want to build a triplex, you need 3 acres and conditional use. And the thousands of dollars associated with that. Or you can build 2 $900,000 homes and permit each of them for $700. So, right now, let's look at, kind of look at it from the builder's point of view. And then I kind of, I'm disappointed this isn't simple. I appreciate, there's good minds looking at it. I want to go back to this whole idea of unintended consequences. By your actions and inactions over the last 3 years, you've basically shown that your vision for rural life is $900,000 homes on 10 acres or on 3 acres. And any deviation from that is like unintended consequences. And, originally this planning commission talked about the need for intervention, but this idea that rural life is something that's manicured into $900,000 homes on 10 acres is an incredible intervention with now known consequences. Whole areas of town with no children. And just encourage you to get over your, a paralysis on unintended consequences and just move as fast as you can. As SJ says, there's another 20 things after this that need to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Jim?
I'd like to thank Planning Commission and Chris's for jumping onto something as abruptly as they have. And I have a major problem after only 47 years here with a lot of what you people are struggling with, because land is not controlled by a piece of paper. Land is controlled by what the soils are. And you have so many duplicative and conflicting regulations between the state and local. In effect, what you're seeing coming out of Montpelier is trying to correct what Chuck is talking about. They're in effect mandating density. You have an incredible opportunity. This is just something I'm offering to you. I've been discussing things with the state, and the town of Jericho has got, I think it's close to $40 million worth of sewage development plans. I would imagine trying to do that scope is probably years away. And the town of Westford did all that work. And then when they wanted to build a $4 million system with a $400,000 local contribution, the people voted it down. So it was 3.6 million of federal and state funds, 400,000 of local funds. And that's essentially next door to us. There is a little decoder ring, if the people that I've been talking to at the state are correct. We can create a Jericho Municipal Authority for sewage, and it doesn't have to be 10, 12, 14, $40 million projects. The projects that Chuck was talking about done by the Senesac brothers, which is across the street from us on Morgan Road, they put in 9 units, and it's a common septic system.
5,000 square feet.
That septic system could in fact be managed by the municipal authority, and it would qualify for the Act 250 exemption. Because, and I have this in writing from the state, it is subject to local review because all of this trickle down has not yet occurred. But the intention, if you think about it, the municipal sewage is going into the rivers, which is going into the lake, and it doesn't screen for toxins and other things that could screen for it. So I'm just saying, I'm happy to share the file that I have, which seems to indicate that if we truly want to have more children and to have more density in Jericho, one of the best ways to do it is to not go for these $10 million projects, but to go for smaller scope with a manager. Now, the nice thing about the environment when you do that is that if the municipality is doing the testing, doing the cleaning, doing the monitoring as compared to all of these unmanaged single family or multiple family houses, unless somebody complains, there's no follow-up on a residential system. So this is a real opportunity if the person that I'm dealing with, who I believe is the person who has the authority, subject to local, I think it's an opportunity. And I just encourage you as you put your wonder list together. And my last
Okay.
commercial is that you have a check offered to the town of Jericho from the Ethan Allen firing range, which is what I call a green recycling of our own money, that if we choose to build a municipal sewage system adjacent to the range, probably 50% of the gross cost or more would be paid for by the range, and simultaneous to that development, you could bring the municipal water that's already at the range
All right, I'm gonna stop you right there.
out to Jericho Center.
Okay, thank you. And also, we're gonna talk a little bit more about the budget and water and wastewater, but I just want to stay focused right now on density and this language and this regulation, but thank you. Chris furiously has been writing notes as you were talking, Bill. Anything else from the public on density, or Chris, Lynn, did you have anything else to advise or offer?
What's being presented and offered is a good first step. You had external forces pushing you in this direction. You're addressing the external forces. If they're pushing you harder to go further, well, I think that will always be the case. And, but I think it's a very good first step. It's doable, it's workable. And you also have to remember, the market is going to drive what gets developed. The regulations are going to allow. So, you know, you can't put the cart before the horse. So, and if you had any questions for me, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to head home.
Okay. Let's bring up our next step slide. Which is meet with Chris Lynn another 27.
Thanks, Jim.
Find mine.
Gotta get a bigger one.
Cognizant.
So we should
So
be
mine's
on
bigger
like
than
21, like I
It's
think
red.
2 or 3 past this one.
You have questions on cover and back? Let me know. We can,
I'll email.
yeah, it's gonna be a few-step process.
There you go. Okay, so that was Chris Flynn is number 3. So here's what we're intending to do is the 3 of us are gonna continue to work on this. We are pretty close on language to replace that yellow with a table plus some better clarifying text. We are, I would say, maybe 50% of the way there on text for the PUD. It's there, it's too complicated, it doesn't read right, it's gotta be better. And then we want to make sure that we understand the new state regulations and that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, because Chris has a whole other interest in making sure that all of our regulations comply with all the new laws anyway. And so David was doing some of that as much as he could, and now there's been more work done, and now we're working on this. So we just want to make sure that we're in sync. We will refine the text and the table. We will take it back to Chris Flynn and some individuals from the Affordable Housing Committee, and then also to the Regional Planning Commission. And then we're going to hopefully do all of that between now and our next meeting. And then in our next meeting, we will have the draft language for your review and a draft report for your review, optimistically thinking that we might be ready at that point to say, good to go, ready to move on to the next step to the select board. Right? That's our plan.
Mhm.
That sound good? Okay. Thank you, SJ. So now we're on to our next topic, which is the, bylaw modernization grant, which is really more part of the planner's report.
Yeah, I think so. The agenda has the town budget prep and wastewater report. Did you want to cover that before we got into?
So item number 7 on the agenda was intended to be during the liaison updates as part of, since we weren't really having much official. So I think I should have changed the agenda before we started, but no, I think we should go to you because it makes
Okay.
more sense conceptually with what we just talked about.
And we do have a slide that says liaison reports.
Yeah.
So that's where we can get to
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Perfect. Great. All right. Bylaw modernization timeline. So I can't remember what we said at the last meeting, but Susan and I met with David White, fleshed out a timeline to get us to the end of this, which we're looking, it's probably going to be like sometime in March, hopefully getting something to the select board in April. So some things that I'm working on now, working on getting David's contract extended until the end of next year. I'll be working with David to identify areas where further discussion is needed. So all of our comments from the planning commission have been forwarded to David. He's looking through those, making changes where he can. And then he and I are going to figure out how to chunk out sort of what's left to be discussed so that we can bring sections of red line back to the planning commission in smaller chunks that are more thematically organized. So we can have a little more methodical process going through for this second round. Now, one way to make this work as smoothly and efficiently as possible, as once we sort of have those chunks, I'm going to be looking for maybe working groups of 3 people, where before the planning commission meeting, we can talk through some things so that when it's coming to the planning commission, it's not just let's have an open discussion. There's going to be a little more thought to respond to. So stay tuned for that. I'll probably be doing that in January as David and I are figuring this out and letting you know what those thematic chunks are. You can see what might interest you and what you might want to be able to look for. Great. So any questions about that? Great.
Well, I have one quick question. Is the schedule driven more by us or the consultant or some combination?
It's being driven, but at this point, it's being driven by the consultant in terms of going through all of the comments that we've already prepared and then figuring out how to methodically manage getting us to the end. Right now, the timeline is being driven by the consultant. Once we get into February and March, it's going to be more on the planning commission and how quickly we can get through the red lines. So hopefully this timeline will hold. One of the reasons I want to have the working groups before in between the planning commission meetings is to make it more efficient when we get to the planning commission meetings and we can stay on track.
And those, when you say red lines, those are David's reworking of our feedback, our comments.
Right, so the planning commission already got a series of red lines in 3 big chunks. I'm going to be working with David on figuring out how, when those red lines come back to you, to make sure that it's clear what the comments were, how they were responded, so that you can sort of see a sequence. So you're not starting from scratch and then saying, okay, based on the feedback that we got before, I'm just hypothetically saying here, there were 2 sets of comments around this one area that were conflicting. We need to resolve that a little more.
So the red lines we get back from David, will not necessarily be the final version of any given section.
It'll be a second round, and if everyone's good with it, then it could be the final.
Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense? Great.
I think of it like version 1, version 2, version 3. We got version 1, and then they'll give us version 2, and then we'll decide if we need a version 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
It's actually keeping in line with how the original project was laid out. We just took a chunk of time here in the middle to regroup and process all of the comments that we got in the 3 batches that went out. Great, so let's go on to the next slide. There's another exciting initiative coming to the Planning Commission, the update to the region's future land use map. This is all being done by the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. It's coming from the state. I'm not going to try to explain it to you right now because that is what the CCRPC is going to be doing at our January 21st Planning Commission meeting. So they will be explaining what the whole update is going to be, how it's going to roll out. What I would just point out now, just so you know that this is coming, it's also good that we just kind of went through and figured out who our liaisons were for the different committees and other commissions in town, because this would be an opportunity as we go through this to reach out where it's appropriate with the other groups in town to make sure that they're pulled in where it's appropriate. I know Sabina and I have already connected with the Conservation Commission because there's some direct, we already know that there's some overlap in some of the things, so there may be some overlap in other things as well. So that's just put a pin in it for now, but it's on, should be on your radar.
Meeting you won't want to miss.
Yes.
Except they're missing.
You're gonna make this in like first?
The rest of us won't want to miss it.
Well, I'll be missing the one on the 7th, so you'll be missing the one. Okay. Great, so that's my update. What I got.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When we are liaisoning to our committees, will we have the information ahead of time from CCRPC to say, here's what they're thinking about, therefore, what are your responses, or is it vice versa?
No, so right now, this is just queuing it up in your
Okay.
mind that this is coming.
Okay,
And there's gonna be a lot more information coming from CCRPC themselves
Okay.
at the meeting on the 21st. And then from then on, like, then you'll have more context.
and that's when the liaising is important.
The liaising may or may not take place depending on what your committee is and whether there's overlap. Yeah, but yeah.
Do you have any anticipation for how much CCRPC will be changing the current status of what they see Jericho as into something different or staying the same? Right now, they see us as a bedroom community that doesn't do much else besides that.
So I don't know exactly. I know as part of what they are doing now is they are looking at what the regional goals are, what the regional plan is, and then what our town plan is, and the updated land use map in the town plan. They have identified they are identifying areas of conflict that will warrant further discussion. I just know that they have done that. They have not shared that with me yet. I think they're in the process of doing that for the whole region. That's part of what I'm thinking we're all going to learn more on the 21st, and it will help us know what to focus on as we move forward.
What if we don't agree with what they're suggesting?
How is the conflict resolved?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
This is Wendy. I'm sorry, I can't find my raise hand feature, but can I jump in here with a question comment?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So the Regional Planning Commission approved that chapter in our 2024 town plan of future land use. So did I understand you correctly that they're saying that what they already approved in our town plan, there's some conflict?
I may have used the word conflict, that's probably not the right word. They are identifying areas to look at in more detail, where we may want to make more changes to our land use map.
Okay.
I think that's kind of like conflict, but with less stress on it.
Well, it's conflict with a smile, right? I mean, it's like, it's an opportunity. Yes.
Where there's a lack of alignment, is
Yes.
what we like to say.
That's a good way.
Is
to
It's a
say it.
lack of
Is the
alignment.
concept that they have a broader perspective to bring to our thinking about our town? I want to sort of understand how what their role is in advising us with our land use.
So as I understand it, the most recent legislation that has come through the state is putting more requirements on the regional planning commissions to take a lead. It is addressing what I think has been a mismatch between previous state legislation, but don't ask me what it is because I don't fully understand that myself yet. So I know they are doing things, the Regional Planning Commission is doing some things for the first time in looking at land use for the region. So it is a work in process in terms of how they are moving forward with this and how they will be engaging the towns in that process. So that is a lot of what we will be hearing about on the 21st is their engagement process and how they want to work with us to make sure Jericho and the residents of Jericho are engaged in the process.
It may be helpful, Chris, if you have an ear and an opportunity for dialogue before they come to us to sort of answer this question that I think we're all asking, which is who gets to make what decision?
Yes, so I've
Right.
already talked to them about scheduling a briefing with Susan and
Beautiful.
myself to,
Okay,
before it comes to the planning commission.
yeah, so if you could just let them know that they're gonna get that question
Yeah.
from us, so if they're prepared for it, that'd be helpful.
One of the main outcomes of the regional land use map and then an updated Jericho land use map is what land is exempt from Act 250, no matter
Got it.
what. And what land is exempt from Act 250 for projects of 50 houses or fewer. And then what land should be even more strictly regulated because it has precious natural resources. And so there's state regulation that needs the map to tell you which regulations apply to which land. And that's all new categories that our current land use maps don't indicate. And my sense is that it's sort of a collaborative process to determine which land you want to be Act 250 always exempt or Act 250 50 or fewer. And that communities have a good idea of where they might want those lines to be drawn. And that's not the only purpose of this conversation, but it's a major driver. And that's one of the mandates that came from the state to the Regional Planning Commission is you got to work with the towns, you got to map it out. And currently we have to eventually go to the state and say, and we would never be one of these, or not never, but it's unlikely that we would qualify as a no Act 250 because you have to be a certain size and whatever. But that we have to go to them and say, please classify us like this. So our housing projects of 50 or fewer can be exempt from Act 250. And we have to have rationale about that. And we have to have proof to back it up about what locations make the most sense.
Thank you, that's really helpful, Susan.
Is that consistent
No,
with
actually,
your understanding?
that is totally consistent. There's like a tier 1A and tier 1B,
Right.
and we're not gonna, the tier 1A is for places that have sewer
Burlington
systems,
and-
which we don't
right.
have, and it's more this tier 1D
Yeah.
area that is more of an interest, more of an opportunity for Jericho, yes.
Right, yeah. Okay, I'm not gonna take your comment now, but we are gonna talk about wastewater in a second, and I just have a feeling that that might circle back to this mapping
I had a
exercise.
comment on Chittenden County Regional Planning. only got 5 decades of involvement with them, so I thought they are very oriented towards infrastructure because a major portion of the impact that goes on in Jericho, it has zero Jericho control. State roads, the fiber optics, power lines, and waterways, and all of those things, Chittenden County Regional Planning are connected into all of that. They are also the gateway to the federal and state funds in order to do any of the stuff that we're discussing. So having a fantastic rapport with Mr. Baker and his team for the town of Jericho, if you have a vision and you see how it all works, we have rail, we have bus, we have all these things that we're not using. There's no reason for our trucks to be driving all over the place when we could have a joint railroad facility for bringing in salt and all this other stuff that makes 5 stops before it gets here. The train could just come to Jericho. So there's all types of opportunities to blend intelligent, because our whole world is changing with people are not commuting to work as much as they were. But we are impacted because they're all driving through here. It's like a railroad train on Route 15.
Right, right.
Can I ask one question before we move on, Susan? With, given where you two are sitting and what you know is coming up, is it time for me, for example, as a planning commission member, to actually read up on the changes to Act 250? I have not done so.
Yeah, actually, I just wrote down that I think some homework to prepare for that meeting on the 21st would be, there's a really good summary around Act 250 that came out recently from the NRC, and we can track it down and send it to the planning commission. And the other thing would be what Wendy mentioned, which is reading our own future land use map chapter in the town plan, because David did quite a bit of work on it, and he was mindful, because these changes have been in the legislature now for like 2 or 3 years. He was pretty mindful of what was likely to be coming down the pike. So I think that would be really good, so that when we sit down on the 21st, you're pretty versed.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
CCRPC also has some like 1-page handouts, which we can send out along with that.
okay. All right, then the next thing is on liaisons. Is that our next slide? Yes, okay. So what I'd really like to do is give most of the time to Chris Brown, who, as the liaison to the mobs committee, went to the select board budget meeting at 8 a.m. When they were beginning discussion of the capital budget and other kind of bigger ticket items. And he went to that meeting and learned a lot and thought it'd be helpful to share it with us.
Okay, yes, so, two, top level takeaways. One is that they asked that the next time we do a town plan, if it could be released in the summer, mid-year, June, they would have time to incorporate that thinking into the next year's budget, as opposed to having it come out, basically like it did last time at the end of the year. So there's, anyway, that's one thing. And then the other takeaway is that they are already, as of last Wednesday, deep into the weeds of this coming year's budget. And so going forward, I think we should be earlier to get to them with our ideas about money, because they're already in the weeds, and they're so far in the weeds, it's hard for them to, sort of step up at this point and look at a broader picture. Having said that, I was, and Chuck was there as well, and I was cautiously optimistic at their receptiveness to going further with the wastewater project. And so what they essentially asked is, we need to sell this to the town. So we need you to sell it to us, basically.
Who's we and who's you in that
Well,
sense?
so they will need to sell the expenditure of money to the town. And so they need, in turn, is my interpretation, they need to be sold. And that's gonna come down to, I think, so my feeling is we should give them a lot of ammunition, most of which we already have and is already out there in the public record, but still wouldn't hurt to recap it. The need for housing, why it's important, where we think it should be, all these things. So I have, my thoughts are that we should focus the money for both next year's budget that we asked for and for the long-term capital budget on 3 items: wastewater and river. And these 3 things are taken from the Du Bois and King report. Their top 3 recommendations: wastewater in Riverside, wastewater in Jericho Center, and water in Jericho Center. And I think, in my mind, water in Jericho Center probably is a priority over wastewater, except for the possibility of collaborating with Ethan Allen, which I think makes that they're sort of equals, I guess. But so and the Du Bois and King report is very clear outline of what the next steps could be, and relative to the Riverside project, they are the next steps as they outline them, and I don't want to read them now, but the next steps, they estimate that cost for those steps to be $197,000. And so I suggested to the select board that they take $200,000 and dedicate it to taking the next step in that process. And that could come, I believe there's flexibility with their reserve fund. It could come out of their reserve fund. And they may or may not have to spend it all. It's possible some grants could cover some of it, but that would move that process forward in a meaningful way. So that's the biggest chunk of money that I think it would be a good idea for us to ask them to dedicate. I think that the wastewater project would benefit tremendously from a wastewater committee that would include a member of the PC, a member of the select board, select town members, and maybe Paula or somebody else would be appropriate. And that Susan suggested when I mentioned that committee may want to ask for a little bit of money in the event that there's some expenses that come up for that. But I think that the formation of that committee will be essential to moving this project forward, both as a buy-in for all the town leaders and also as a vehicle for communicating with the town as a whole, to sort of move this, to get general agreement on the importance of the project and to get people to support it as it goes forward. I also think that we should ask for an RFP to design an extension of the water system to Jericho Center. So that's not, the RFP doesn't cost anything, but we should get one so that we can keep that process happening. I think we could think about asking them to allocate somewhere between $175,000 and $200,000 annually in the capital budget, long-term budget, for the longer-term construction of the wastewater system in Riverside. And if you look at the numbers, that it's not a constant number, and we could get into that in more detail, but it would be a placeholder going forward. Anyway, so that's my summary of what we should ask. My recommendations for how we approach the select board relative to the wastewater and infrastructure. But I also think sort of non-related recommendations would be reaching out to Ethan Allen to figure out exactly what their role in the shared wastewater system would be, so we can understand what specifics of that collaboration could be. Get the wastewater committee to work on funding sources for the Riverside wastewater project. And use the UVM grant program that we already have to assist the wastewater committee for public outreach to move that forward. I think we should the town should establish a timeline for the wastewater project that could be released publicly, so that a developer can look at that and say, okay, I see that you're working on this, and I see that in year X, you will have, there'll be a shovel in the ground, and in year Y, I can, connect a toilet to it. It would be really helpful, I think, to engender support for the idea, and it would give developers some sense of confidence that it's actually going to happen. And then the last thing, which is also mentioned in the Dubois King report, is reaching out to Richmond about the possibility of connecting wastewater from Jericho Center to the Richmond system. So that's, I guess, a brief, but long overview
No, good.
of my experience with the select board. So I think that they, like I said, there were 2 of the 3 members were in the room when I suggested this, and the 2 people that were there were pretty open to this. They said I think they have, a little bit of shell shock from, somebody said, well, we get people giving us a hard time about buying a shovel for the town. And so if we're asking them to spend, X number of dollars, we need to really know why. The other thing that I learned is that the town knows, so if you take the $200,000 for the next step in the Riverside project, the town knows on past expenditures how that relates to somebody who owns like a $500,000 house. So a $300,000 expenditure from the town works down to a $44 increase in someone who has a $500,000 house to their tax bill. So you could extrapolate down to $200,000 cost would be $30 for somebody with a $500,000 house. And that's the form in which the select board wants to think about this and understand it, because that's the form that the individual person is going to understand. And so my takeaway from that is, $30, like I can't speak for everyone, that seems pretty reasonable to me, to move this project forward to the next step. So, but I think that we are behind, we're late coming to this for this year's coming budget. And so they said, whatever you're going to get us, you got to get it to us right away, because we're, the wheels are
We're
already
late,
spinning.
but a lot of what you're describing is a very good, like, crystallizing of what's in the report. And then kind of
Yes, but
putting that in the context of the town and how we get it done and.
But I think we're not technically late, because technically they're still working on the budget.
Right.
But what that means, in my reading of the room when I was there, what that means is that they've already made all the major decisions, and now they're sorting through the weeds. And so that's why I think, in a sense, we're a little bit late with this, because it's a big ask. We're not too late, but we need to sort of get something meaty to them soon.
So what format do you see that taking? Like a presentation at a meeting, a letter and a presentation, a nice nuts bowl and
The $50 bill.
yeah.
I think it depends on, it would depend a little bit on what they, how much time they were willing to dedicate to it for example, in one of their meetings, which are probably already spoken, all the time is probably already spoken for. So it might be somewhat dependent on them, but I think my feeling is in a way, we should have it distilled down to a simple, manageable thing. But on the other hand, at the same time, the more information we give them and that they can give the town, the more, I think, the easier the buy-in will be. And we in this room are coming at this with, I've been hearing about this since I've been on the planning commission.
Right.
And so,
But would you, do they think that they need to advocate for the big picture strategy in order to have the public support $200,000 in this year because we want to do all these other things? Or do they have more of a mindset of like, we're just going to go to the next step? This is the defined next step. This is the spending. We'll see where we get to, and then we'll decide what the next step is going to be.
I think it's both. I think that the commitment to spending the $200,000 on the next step, it'd be nice not to just be throwing that $200,000 away.
Right.
So you'd want to go into it with some cautious optimism that, the thing with the project is actually doable and that this is how it would be doable. And so I think that the town would need someone with a level of expertise in funding municipal projects of this scale to say, this is the map. I don't know I don't know who that is, but
Did you watch the presentation that the select board had where they had the finance
no.
resource? You might want to know that.
Yeah, I should go back and look
Watch
at that, yeah.
one. They had somebody who came and presented to them on different financing
Mhm.
options.
SJ has her hand up.
Well, one more thing. So what the Du Bois and King report is relatively good at, I think, is outline what the estimated project costs might be. What they don't do at all is estimate what the potential longer term benefits would be, revenue, money coming in.
Right.
And that would be, in my mind, an important piece to sell this is that, yes, it's going to cost money up front, but in the long run, these are all the benefits, not just the housing, but lower tax bills, more people spending money in town. So that's a missing piece, I think, from the Du Bois and King report right now, and it's probably not something that they're maybe qualified or confident to project, but.
And I think also key to the PR is that, all these projected costs, right? They're not necessarily going to fall on our backs 100%. They're
Correct.
So there's going to be subsidies and grants and things like that, so that even though the number looks really big on paper, our portion of it
Right.
is going to be some of that, but not
Right.
all of it. And I think that's so important for people to understand.
On that same subject, the other part is, I would not exclude the corners from anything we're doing, because we want to show that the benefits of the wastewater don't accrue just to two small parts of the town, but they accrue to the entire town, both in the form of everybody gets better taxes, we're able to get better growth, we get more revenue into the town, tax base goes up, so on and so forth. And saying that we're going to take one whole section of the town, and you guys aren't going to get it right now, I think we missed the opportunity to say, let's do this all, do it at one shot. Yes, it's a little bit more, but if it's $40 per household as opposed to $70 per household.
It's exponentially more. I think it would be,
But it's exponentially more people who get on the system, and I'll bang on this drum until the cows come home. Drive down Route 15, look at all of those split ranch homes that are there, that several of them are now being renovated at God knows how much it's going to cost for them. And those are perfect locations for multifamily housing. And it's the right location.
Well, what
We have a bigger bang for a buck there.
yeah, what I really think we should emphasize is Riverside, to the exclusion of everything else. But I think that it's not going to cost the town anything to ask for an RFP to design the water connection to Jericho Center like that. That's not money that would be spent right away. So I think we need to keep that moving. But I think we need to focus on Riverside. So that $200,000 ask is to design the Riverside system. I think it's not going to cost us anything to reach out to Richmond. It's not going to cost anything to reach out to Ethan Allen. and figure out what their roles might be and how that would benefit us. But the money we should be asking for, in my opinion, is for Riverside.
SJ, you've been really patient. Go ahead.
So Chris, I think what I'm hearing you say is kind of three big things. One, I think you've just written the charter for the Jericho Wastewater Committee. You did a really good job of outlining mission and goals and a plan for the first year of the committee's existence and things that they should be doing. The second thing I think I heard you say was, as a planning commission, we need to be thinking about what we can do proactively to encourage and support the select board in making this decision and moving this forward. And so communicating to them, these are things that we're committed to doing. These are things that we're capable of. Here's a bunch of talking points, et cetera. The grant that you mentioned, I'm glad that you brought that up. I was thinking about that too, with UVM. And then the last thing, the 200,000, and man, maybe we're late to the table, but I've been hearing suggestions that they put together an infrastructure reserve fund, potentially to the tune of $200,000 to seed it with, for quite a while now. And that's been recommended both by the housing committee and by individuals to them. So it's not a new concept for them to wrap their brains around. And rather than having to fill out line items for how that money is going to be spent, I think we all know that at the end of the day, no matter what decisions get made, that Du Bois and King report outlines a real failure of systems that we're all looking at, that the town is looking at, a failure of septic and the real need for water, and that whether this is the solution or not, we have infrastructure needs that we need to start investing to be able to address, hopefully before they become acute problems, but potentially react to.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, I'm not proposing we ask for a $200,000 reserve fund. I'm proposing we ask for $200,000 to be spent in the coming year on this very specific engineering task. So in my mind, I think maybe a slightly more specific and concrete ask than an abstract reserve fund, which can be kicked down the road as it has been. So I think this is a very intentional, very specific ask for a very specific project.
And you think that they are in a position, let me rephrase that. You think that they are persuadable to write a $200,000 check
I think
to be spent, I guess that's the difference.
There were, as I said, 2 of the 3 people in the room, and they were open to taking this to having us prepare them to take this to the town.
Well, so they have their town meeting reimagined, SJ, as you know, the next meeting is on January 23rd. So our goal would be, and they are trying to finalize their budget like this first or second week in January so that it can be emailed to all the town people. So our goal would be to get it included in that draft. And it seems like the worst case scenario is that we propose it. If they don't include it in their draft, then it gets proposed on the floor on the 23rd. Like, you can propose a new swing set and you can propose, that's, it's a town meeting, that's how it's gonna go.
Yeah.
So, yes, Heidi.
Thank you. I'm tired, so I might not.
I know, I was just looking at the
I'm sorry,
time
can you
also.
tell? Well, I'm just trying to think of one of the other pieces of strategy that it's sort of okay, we spend it, and what's convincing, what's most convincing is if we spend it, we actually have somebody who's ready to invest the funds to do the next thing. Right, and I know there's been lots of conversations about potential developers of Riverside and other parts and parcels, and it's almost like if we really wanted something to move forward, being able to say that there's been conversations or there's energy or there's interest, that it's not just we'll build it and they will come, but in fact, we know that if we build it, we have potential investors. I think that just makes it, because, as we keep saying, it's like, we can make it more interesting, but where it gets developed or where it happens is not because of us, it's because developers want to do it.
Right.
So I guess I would say that we want, maybe it's not short term, but it's long-term strategy is those are the voices that need to be in the room and not just ours.
So our next meeting is on January 7th, and what I kind of imagined is that we would start the conversation at this meeting and then come back to it on January 7th and look at something in writing that's, 1 to 2 pages, because I know Chris already has a lot of it drafted, that we would be comfortable with then taking that, advocating to the select board in writing with a request to present it. If they aren't, interested to have us present it, that would sort of be up to them. So it's a quick turnaround. And is there somebody who wants to work with Chris on flushing it out to make it as compelling as possible and as short as possible in as short amount of time as possible during the holidays? Like, that's the ask.
So I want to clarify my hand raise that I was not necessarily volunteering. But I do have a question.
Yes.
What we're saying is what we're going to propose is that it's that specific. We're not proposing a reserve fund, but we're saying $200,000 or whatever the number is going to be to have the engineers design. That's what's on the table right now, right?
Yes, and if you're in the town plan, one of the tasks for the planning commission is to assess the Du Bois and King report and provide comments to the select board about that report. So I think this could be delivered in that context and to say, here's our comment, great report, too bad it didn't say enough about this, that, and the other thing. And it very clearly outlines these are the next 5 steps, and we think let's do those 5 steps plus these 2 more and organize it this way with this kind of a committee. And here's some people who might be on that committee. What are you waiting for? Like, what more do you need? Serve it to them on a silver platter. Like, I know sometimes they say like, well, this is a good goal, but we don't have a plan, and they don't really see always how to get to a plan. And I think we could make it easier for them to see, okay, this is how I get to a plan.
And my audio was cutting off. Sorry, Chris, that you might have already said this, but that number that $200,000 number, what is that based on? Is that like a real number for a design study? And a corollary to that, does the town need to have an RFP for the design study, or can it just be an extension of Du Bois and King?
It is Du Bois and King's, forget the acronym, but it's their estimated cost, their anticipated cost for the next steps in the project, which would include things like test pits. It's not strictly engineering, but it's also, some shovels in the ground. But they outline what those next steps are in this 90% report. And they estimated 197,000.
Okay, thank you.
And again, I just think it's worth reiterating. This is not new. This should have been on their radar this whole time. So, and that aggression is not directed at anyone in the room, but just to say, like, we're not throwing them a curveball at the last minute, and we shouldn't feel like we are. This has been the topic of conversation, and they've had access to this report before we all have. So I think we're standing on solid ground.
So is there anybody, I know your hand is up, Chuck, and I'm ignoring you on purpose. I'm not even looking that way because it's 9:05. And I'm trying to drive to a conclusion, which is I want somebody potentially to help Chris take this recommendation to the next step for our next meeting.
I'll join Chris
And
if
then
you want
we
me.
can talk about it a lot more, and for public who have a lot more to say about it, they can either deliver those comments to Chris Shaheen or Chris Brown or to the planning commission at our next meeting.
I'm a great editor. I'm not a great content contributor, but I'd
Okay.
be happy to be
I'll
helpful
work
as
with
an
Okay,
editor.
and I hear Sarah McLeod in my head, short, to the point. With referring, page of the town plan, page of the D&K report, we don't have to regurgitate all this. We've already written. Yeah, get that word deletion there. Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna wrap up and plan for our next meeting. So January 7th, this will be our major topic. And then also January 7th, we'll be back at our density text. And is there anything else that you know of that we need to do for January 7th?
I think that's looking at one of those.
Okay, so that'll be January 7th. And then January 21st will be CCRPC. And so you'll be looking for material from probably through Chris for homework and try to give you a lot of time to read it at your leisure. Hopefully not a lot of stuff to read, but just to have, so that everybody's a little bit better versed when we come to that meeting.
Susan, before we adjourn, should we address the email we all got from Bob and Host?
I think Chris, we considered his, I think the topic around water and septic relates to density. And I think his comment about the town maintenance facility was similar to other public comment that we heard, and Chris Flynn explained that they would need to get a water permit from the state. So in my mind, it was addressed. Chris and I'll figure out about how we want to respond.
I think we covered all of his topics.
Yeah.
We just didn't read his letter in full, but it's.
I think as long as he submits it to the planner, it's on the record. It's on the record. Okay. All right, motion to adjourn.
Adjourned.
Wait, so Eric made the motion to adjourn. Chris seconded it. All those in favor of adjourn say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Aye.